It is September 2016. I stand up in the middle of a room. It is a small, empty area in reality. In the first rows, there are some people seated, and then there are some more people standing, unknown people. I have no idea why on earth I decided to go there and share my story and my hardships with a number of unknown people, just like you. A few weeks before, when I was asked, it all seemed easier. I said yes. But then, when the moment came, it was not that easy. Anyway, I had no way to go back. I never liked public speaking. Actually, the fear of public speaking was one of the reasons why many years before that, I decided to give an end to my brief academic career. Back then, again and again, when time came for the lecture of the day, I could feel cold sweat dripping down my body, a typical but extreme sign of fear of public speaking. And here I was, before an audience just like you, unknown people, to share a story, but not just any story, a failure story, my story. The story of how, a few years before that, I decided to create a business, and how that business eventually failed. The result of economic crisis in my country, of my own shortcomings, and some ill-meant associates. So I am there. I have no way to get out of this. I started wondering why I'm there. I remember that a few weeks before, a friend kept telling me, you have to do this, you have to do this. Why should I share a painful story with an audience? She said, you have to do this because there might be other people who, through your painful story, will find something that will appease their own challenges. So I step up, I gather all my courage. I started sharing the story in a rather cohesive manner. There are some tears here and there. I'm known to be a very sentimental person. And when I'm done, when the audience starts clapping, the most amazing thing happens. The story is not as painful anymore. Really. When my story is aired in public, when it is shared with others, surprisingly, it loosens its grip on me. In the days and the weeks that follow, many people I know and people I don't know, call or text me to tell me how they were moved. In a country like Greece, where people don't talk about failures, where most people carry themselves around with this air of pride and significance, telling other people a story of failure is not an easy thing. It is rather unthinkable. October 2017, a year later, in a month, I find myself on another stage, a grand stage this time. I step up because I have been asked at a conference termed Women of Influence. As I step up on a grand stage, something like this, imagine the lights coming up, a big theater scene. I step up on the grand stage. I'm dressed in my favorite vintage suit and my high heels, but I am at a loss, me, at a conference about powerful women, to share again my experience. But this time, I'm invited not to share my story as a story of failure, but rather as a story of resilience. So I find myself on the stage, I finish my talk, I see people clapping, and in the first few rows, I see seated comfortably in these blue velvet seats some people I know well. People who used to laugh at me, and people who used to point out at my failures. Yes, these people now clap and hail me as a model of strength and resilience. So, what happens between the first story and the second one? In reality, nothing has changed. Very little has changed. Yes, I start from a different point. I have a new job, new professional affiliations, new aspirations, and a renewed feeling of hope. In reality, things are pretty much the same. I still owe a lot of money. I still try to find up my courage every day. I still start I still try to find ways to gather courage and go on with my life, and I still made decisions out of fear. What has changed between the first and the second story, in reality, is the narrative that I have been telling myself. In other words, the story. What has changed is the story. Let me remind you that we humans are storytellers by nature. We love stories, and we share stories all the time. 70% of what we share with one another are stories, big and small ones. And we remember stories 22 times more than we remember facts and figures. And we love stories. We have stories about almost everything. We have stories from our childhood, about our first day at school and our first kiss, about the summer when we met, for instance, the love of our lives, our first breakup and its pain, how we felt. We will not forget that. About how we lost our first job and that pain. We have stories about things that are big and things that are unimportant, and also we have stories about things that happened long time ago when we were kids, but also things that happened just yesterday when we were walking on the street and accidentally we met somebody, an old friend, for instance. So we love stories. And we don't only tell stories to other people, we tell stories to ourselves. Yes. Even now, as you listen to me, you are most probably telling yourself some sort of a story. You don't realize it. Even at night, when you go to bed, your mind stays up and it tells itself stories. Stories have amazing power in our lives. And they are something that shapes our life today and shapes our future life as well. Let me look at my notes, because, it's my second language. So, imagine, okay. Now, in truth, we don't think about these stories all the time. It's not as if this is a rational situation. We don't think about stories. Sometimes we don't even know stories are in our mind in the first place. We forget about them, but they are there. They're always in our minds. They're invisible, undetected for the most part. But still, they can change a lot the way we feel about ourselves. Some of these stories are good stories. Are stories about days when we were at our best. Are stories that remind us of our past successes, of days when we looked and felt our best, of things that we want to remember. Stories, good stories from our past can predict good stories, good things happening to us in the future. And they are a clue that tells us that we can follow the path that we have selected for ourselves, that we can go on that path and we can achieve one way or another our dream life. But unfortunately, our mind doesn't always like and catch positive stories. Quite on the contrary. We all have negative stories, stories about things that are not as positive and as optimistic. And we tend to remember the negative things far more than the positive ones. For instance, we all remember traumatic experiences much more than positive experiences. We think about negative things longer. They stay with us much longer. They are there. And not only they sit in our minds, but they make decisions for us. Negative stories are stories that are clues as to our life in the future. Have you ever heard the term negative bias? It is a term that suggests our obsession with negative things. We humans love negative stories. Look at the news, for instance. We love negative stories. We catch them, and this is the story we spread to others. We don't only spread it to others. We tell it to ourselves all the time. So, if we remember good stories, we have clues as to how we can design our life in a positive way. If we remember negative stories, we have clues as to keep living our lives on a negative basis, based on our shortcomings, based on things that we cannot achieve. Now, try to imagine your brain as a collector. your brain goes past to your life and picks up things here and there. It turns them into stories. Big stories and small stories. Your brain does not review these stories. It doesn't wonder if they're right, if they're wrong, perhaps if they could help you. If it sees a story and it likes the story, it takes it for granted and it amplifies it. So our mind is a bit like this. Bad stories, crap in reality. So these stories play like a tape in our mind again and again and again. What can we do about these stories? I said, our mind doesn't review them. If we feed it these stories, it acts as if they were true, as if they were something that actually happened to us. So, what has brought all of us here is a set of stories. It might be positive stories or negative ones. If what brought you here are positive stories and you're happy with your life, think of your life now, and if you're happy, career, love, your body, your health, your money. So if this is good for you, rejoice. You have done great things, but your stories have also helped you in the meantime. If not, if there are things that you would like to change here and there, you need to do a set of new things, obviously. But you also have to change the stories you're telling yourself. Okay, sounds exotic and perhaps, out of mind, but this is not a concept that I am introducing to you now. Actually, it is a concept that psychologists and athletic coaches have been known for years. And it works. If you change the way you think about things, you will see your life change. So if you change the way you see your life on the inside, you will see your life changing on the outside as well. The only thing that you have to be, if there's a gap between where you are now and the life that you want to follow, there is one thing that you need to do. And this thing is no other than to rewrite your story. Yes, you can rewrite your story. Sounds easy, is harder, but it can be done in 4 distinct steps. The first step is to monitor what you're telling yourself. So monitor your brain and catch your stories in the act. Try to identify those silent stories that you don't realize otherwise and connect them to your behaviors. Once you connect them to your behaviors, your life will start changing. For instance, does your phone ring with a special ringtone that you have selected for your boss and you frown all of a sudden? There's a story there. Is there a place in town that you want to avoid going to? There is another story. So catch these stories in the act. The second thing to do is to start editing these stories. Ask yourself, is this story true? Does it serve me? Does it take me where I want to go? Tweak the stories, change them. Start with a leading role yourself. Are you presented in the story the way you want to be? Do you perhaps have other powers, some superpowers, some strengths? Are there areas in your life where you have done better and you can transfer this experience to the story you are telling yourself now? Go to the setting, to places. Are there places that you should stop visiting because they make you feel sad? Don't go. Go to people, to the rest of the cast. Is the rest of the cast in line with what you want to do? If yes, keep them. If no, change them. So tweak the story, edit the story, and come up with a new one. The third step is to install the new story. Now, past stories are kind of stubborn. They don't disappear by miracle because you just said so. You have to install them in your brain very consciously. So come up with a new scenario and put it carefully in your mind. The fourth thing is to live the story, to play the part, to act as if it were true. Work the way an actor works. Read the part and pretend, act out the role. The more you do it, you will see a new person emerging out of you. Now, let me take you back to my story. Between my first story, the story of failure, and my second one, that of resilience, I told you that not many things had changed. The one thing that had changed was the narrative. How did I go about it? I started rewriting. I realized things that were wrong. And I started with what was happening around me. I stopped meeting people who were not good for me, who did not bring out the best of me. I stopped going to places that made me really sad and frustrated. And then I looked at myself and I tried to find strengths in my own life. I asked myself, yes, I said to myself, yes, I have failed. I have lost a lot of money and I have lost my self-esteem in the process. But is everything black and gloomy? Are there perhaps areas where there are things that I have changed, things where I have succeeded? And I started looking inside for things that might work. And I came up with something that did work. I had been running marathons for many years by that time. So I decided to very consciously translate the experience from marathon running to problem solving. I changed my self-talk. I started telling myself empowering things like a person who runs a marathon is a strong person. A person who runs kilometer after kilometer is a competent person. And day after day, kilometer after kilometer, it started changing. So I started changing the narrative by transferring the experience from marathons to my daily life, to problem solving. I came up with the idea that I would turn my life around and I would turn failure around the way I did with running. I would do it one day at a time and 1 mile at a time. And it worked. Now, it was not an easy thing. It was not an immediate success. It was not an overnight hit. But day in, day out, I could see that things were changing. The story is not perfect. Still, I rewrite it every day. But I have improved it considerably using this technique of rewriting. And here we are now. It is May 2023, and I find myself here before you, unknown people for the most part again, to share my story. These days, I share stories with people like you all over the globe again and again. And every time I share my stories, I have the power to rewrite them, to rethink them. Stories matter. Mostly the stories that we tell ourselves when nobody listens. Choosing which stories to tell ourselves is really important. It makes all the difference. Every day, all of you have the power to either choose a story that will propel your life forward, that will push you forward, or a story that will keep you stuck back in a place where you no longer fit. You can do this every day. The choice is yours. The choice is mine. And all of us have the power to rewrite our stories every day. So take a new pencil and a blank page and start rewriting tonight. Thank you.